Today's challenge is to make a wedding cake in 10 minutes. Wedding cakes are notoriously very expensive, so expensive that I didn't even have one for my wedding. So I thought that today I would make it up to myself and make a wedding cake, the wedding cake I would have made if I had time, in just 10 minutes. Someone start the clock. Are we ready? First thing I'm going to do is pre-bake all of my cakes. I know what you're thinking, you cheated. I did, but there's just no way that you're going to make 10-minute cakes. So I've already made the cakes in the heart-shaped pans. Today we are making a retro vintage style heart cake. These cakes are really famous at BROOKI. We make so many of them. I can say with confidence that I would have made thousands of these cakes for other people's weddings. Now it's time to make my wedding cake. So we're going to start with the bottom layer. I'm gonna make a 3-layer cake today because I'm feeling ambitious. I'm gonna give that one a quick cut. If you don't have a straight cake, it's gonna make it a lot harder when you are getting to the point of stacking. Wow, cake everywhere. So I'm gonna go with the first layer. I'm just gonna add a thin layer of buttercream because I do have 3 layers of cake. Push that out to the sides. We're gonna repeat that process with the other cakes. Hopefully they're not all on a bit of a lean. And then I'm just gonna turn that one over and go straight on top. Give it a little push so that it pushes into the buttercream. I don't want the buttercream layer to be too thick because the last thing I wanna do is have too much buttercream. So I'm just gonna spread it out so it's a little bit thinner. And then 3rd layer. It's like Cake Olympics. All right, 3rd layer, here we go. Flip that one straight over and just give it a little bit of a push down. All right, last layer is our cake crumb layer. And I don't want too much buttercream because I'm just gonna scrape it all off. And you see, the thing about crumb coating is that it is trapping in all of those crumbs, but it is also pushing all of those crumbs around onto the buttercream. So I really just wanna use what I need because all of that crumb coat buttercream can't be used for the exterior of the cake. So I'm gonna use a little bowl there just to scrape off any extra. And now I'm pushing down the sides, trapping in all of those crumbs. It does help if your cakes are chilled a little beforehand, either in the fridge or maybe you made them well in advance and you pulled them out of the freezer. It also is just less stressful if you make the cakes in advance. If you are following this recipe for your own wedding cake, I recommend making the cakes, freezing them immediately, so wrapping them properly in Glad wrap like you saw them at the beginning, and then freezing them until you are ready to ice the cake. That way you can ice the cake maybe a day or 2 before your wedding day, and then it's all done and you don't have to stress about it. It can just sit in the fridge ready to go. Typically, I would put this one in the fridge for like a couple of hours, but because we are on the clock, it's gonna go in and come straight back out as soon as my buttercream is ready. So next thing we're gonna do is keep beating the buttercream so that it's a little bit more pale. So we're gonna whip that up nice and good. Can't forget the vanilla essence. And then I've got some of my pre-sifted icing sugar. Don't forget to turn the beater down because otherwise it is going to fly everywhere. Nice and low and slow until it's incorporated, and then I'm gonna speed it up. Give it a little scrape down the sides of the bowl. Usually I do this a few times, but since we're going against the clock, I'm gonna do it just once. So long as the buttercream is nice and whipped to a consistency that's nice and glossy and smooth, it's going to be fine, but you have to make sure that everything's incorporated. The butter is nice and smooth, the icing sugar is sifted, that is a non-negotiable, and everything is whipped up really nice and soft and glossy. Okay, let's get the cake out. It is going to be a little bit more difficult to ice this cake without it being completely chilled as the crumb coat. But since I said I'm gonna do it in 10 minutes, I'm gonna do it in 10 minutes. So I'm just gonna be really soft as I place the buttercream on the top there. Because this is a wedding cake, I'm going for a neutral vibe, just the classic buttercream. And then we're gonna jazz it up at the end with a little bit of decorating. Careful not to push too hard on the cake because it's not chilled. But the trick is just to go nice and gently. And the way I'm gonna do that is instead of pushing down all that buttercream from the top really heavily, I'm just gonna kind of scrape it off towards the sides. And then I'm gonna build out the walls of the cake with additional buttercream. That's how I'm placing it onto the side of the cake. What we want to make sure is that we are not disrupting any of that crumb coat underneath, because we want it to be super smooth on the outside so you can't see any of that cake layer underneath. All I'm going to do is use this straight cake scraper, sit it on the side there, and I'm actually just going to do a rough layer first, and then I'm going to show you a really good trick that we do in the bakery. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to heat this up under a hot tap just for a few seconds so that it gets nice and warm. Make sure you dry that one off as well. We don't want it to be wet, but just nice and warm. And that is going to help get a much smoother gloss on our buttercream. Now we're going to do the same thing on the top. So a few little things to note. You can kind of see the cake almost starting to come through. That's fine because I'm going to use a piping technique to go over top of that. Here where you can see it's a little bit rough around the edges and it's not perfect. I could stand here a lot longer and make it perfect, but we are on the clock. So I want to just make that heart shape a little bit more definitive by pushing in at the top there. Okay, let's decorate. So I've got my piping bags, a couple of different piping tips. I'm going to be using an open star tip. Push that one to the end. I don't want to overfill the bag, so we're just going to put enough that we need, and then we can always refill the bag. So starting out at the back of the cake on the bottom towards the cake board, it's just a little lift and release. We're going to keep doing that all the way around the cake, so a little lift and release all the way through to the front so that we have a perfect bottom layer. Next up is the top. I do the same thing starting out at the top. Here you can see I'm hiding any of those rough edges of the cake just by piping over top of them. And then I'm going to stop on the top layer. I'm going to stop at this point in the heart cake, and I'm going to go back to the top of the cake and pipe all the way back down. There we have the top and the bottom of the heart cake. Now the next thing we're going to do, because we are overachievers for our wedding day, we are going to do some additional piping with a leaf tip. And then we're just going to do the same thing. Cut the edge there, push that one through to the end. I don't need as much for the ruffles as I use for the shells because it's a much smaller tip. I'm going to make sure that the piping bag is nice and firm just by giving it a nice push to make sure there's pressure on the bag. And then I'm also just going to push out the end there just to make sure that there's no air bubbles before I start piping onto the cake. Next thing I'm going to do is I am going to mark the cake. So what I'm going to do with this tip, I'm going for the vertical, I don't know, what do you call it? I'm running out of time. The vertical orientation towards the cake, I don't know. So we're going to go at the top. So basically what I'm doing is I'm marking where that's going to be, and then I can go around the same point and just make those marks so that all of the ruffles add up and they look nice and uniform. So there you can see all of the points that I'm going to pipe to are already marked, and then I can't stuff it up. So what I'm going to do is hold that bag nice and firm, and then I'm just going to do a little ruffle on the way down, coming back up, and I'm going with that top layer first to keep it nice and consistent and even. That's the first layer. How good does that look? Now we're going to do the same thing but on the bottom layer. So same thing, just a little front back motion. Okay, next thing we're going to do is go back in with our open star tip. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this one to do the same lift and release motion and give these nice little shells on each of the ruffles. Love it! Okay, the last thing we need to do is to write the message because every cake needs to say something. I'm going to get a little bit of buttercream, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some color to it. Come on. All right, so I'm going to mix that in. The next thing I need is one more piping bag, a number 2 round tip, which is this tiny little guy used for writing messages. Let's see how we go. I do want to push any air out of that piping bag, so just make sure that it's all out, and then roll up the sleeves and let's just go for it. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? This is kind of like when you do your mascara in the morning and you start to make these funny faces because you're concentrating and you don't even realize, but I can't help it, it has to happen. I'm gonna go off to the side a little bit more because I know that the word married is a little bit longer, and ideally everything will look nice and centered. So cute. Oh, oh. And there you have it, your very own wedding cake in just 10 minutes. And also it's a lot cheaper if you make it yourself from home. So give it a go. It could be a fun little activity with your girls for a hen's night, or it could end up being your wedding day cake. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. Did you try it? I will see you guys next time.